I am a male and I am now 30 years old. My family moved to the United States when I turned 14, but I grew up in Russia in a town called Kirov. It was big enough to house a full spread of criminal activity, from organized crime to cannibalistic homeless people. These few stories are not tied together by anything other than a cultural connection. They are brief, absolutely true, and hopefully will give you a small glimpse of the state the country was in during the 1990s, right after the collapse. When I was very little, we lived in a typical Russian 5-story apartment building and what would be considered a middle-class neighborhood. It was fairly quiet, with not much happening, so we kids could play outside for as long as we wanted without adult supervision. I remember a man who lived on the first floor of our building. His kitchen window overlooked the staircase, which ran out onto the sidewalk. He was probably in his mid to late 30s, always wearing a dirty tank top, never clean-shaven. Every time I walked or rode my bike past his window, he would be sitting there. Sometimes he had a glass of milk in his hand. Then, suddenly, he would jump up from his chair and begin to yell and shout as loud as he could at me. Swearing, calling me names, threatening me. All of this he would do with excessive violent movement and facial expressions. As a 4-year-old kid, I would just stand there in horror, watching him go into his crazy, murderous act. He would fall on his elbows on the windowsill and shake his head, feverishly spitting out curses and death threats. His eyes would bulge. He would punch his chest with all his strength, almost in tears from some deep rage, announce how much he hated me, how much he wished I was dead, and if that wasn't enough, he would then pretend to go for the door, as if he had finally resolved to go through with it. Then come back to the window for more shouting and more threats. I just remembered never being able to stay there for long. I would always run away, overcome by the horror, while he stared at me from the window. One day he was just gone, disappeared. No more insane man in the window. Being a kid, I moved on with my life and didn't think about it again for years, until much later when I told my parents about him and what he had done. The story they told me confirmed my suspicions about his true nature. Around the same time as one of the last times I had seen him, something strange happened in our city. Body parts were found scattered throughout Kirov, all far from each other, and all belonging to one unfortunate man whose wife had plotted to kill him in order to acquire his apartment and belongings. Her brother happened to be the man from our building. He violently killed the husband, dismembered his body in a bathtub, and distributed the pieces, including the head, all throughout the city. The investigation led to the wife. She quickly blamed everything on her dear brother, who to this day is likely sleeping in some dark cell far away in the cold. When I was in 8th grade, my school started having roof problems. It was an old building which used to belong to some merchant who lived back in the days of the Tsars. Every year it deteriorated more and more, until one year part of the ceiling actually fell on a class full of students. While the building was being restored, the student body was temporarily relocated to the public school number 22. I still remember it clearly. That place was a fortress of bad behavior, bordering on homicide. The students at school number 22 mostly came from horrible circumstances and took pleasure in humiliation, severe beatings, really just any kind of abuse. At the time, street fighting was very common in Russia, and the fights rarely ended with just a black eye or a busted lip. Broken bones, skull fractures, comas, and even deaths were routine. One day, as my friends and I were talking in a hallway between classes, a big, bald kid came up to us with his entourage of hopeless degenerates. He told us that they had had enough of us, and that they were planning to beat the life out of any boy from our school once classes were over. They didn't like us from the start because our school was considered preppy, and they acted as if we were intruding on their territory. He said they were all going to be there and it was gearing up to be a great show. We knew immediately he meant it. This guy held a certain authority in that dark place. Most kids were afraid of him. He was one of those people who had learned to swing at anyone who even slightly annoyed him. And he wasn't alone. There were many of them. We told our teachers what he had said, and they let us leave secretly, 20 minutes before the final class ended. My friends and I all stuck together as we got dressed for the winter weather and left the school. The plan was to stay in a group and walk to the bus stop. I got on my bus and stood by the window. The route passed right by the school, and I would be able to see the courtyard in front of the main entrance. As we drove by, what I saw became etched in my memory for the rest of my life. On the white snow, in the clearing before the large doors of school number 22, was an assembly of about 200 to 250 people, mostly male, dressed in black, standing in a giant circle. In the middle of that circle, I saw a fight underway. Just two of them, one standing with his arms thrown open as if taunting the other, and the second clearly looking like he didn't want to be there. It turned out to be a major operation on their part. More people had been invited to what they had planned. I later learned that when they found out we had left early, they decided to beat one of their own instead. Some poor kid was picked and beaten so badly he ended up in the intensive care unit. Our school was small and some parents chose to homeschool their children during the repairs. We would have easily been outnumbered 10 to 1. I hate to think what might have happened if our teachers hadn't let us out early that day. The next day, armed security guards were stationed at the school. They remained there until we were able to return to our original building, the old but now dearly loved home of a long-dead merchant. Going back to a time when I was younger, this last story is my personal claim to victory in the game of life or death, which sometimes falls into our hands for no apparent reason at all. I was maybe 9 years old. We had moved to a better area, more space, better location. Our apartment was on the 6th floor, the very last apartment on the landing. It was as far from the building's entrance as you could go and fairly secluded. The staircase was completely indoors, essentially housing anyone who entered in a steady climb, floor after floor, with 4 apartments to each landing. That day I came home from school around 2 p.m. My parents weren't due back for at least 3 more hours, and I set about doing my usual homework, watching TV and emptying the fridge. I had just settled in for an episode of Babylon 5 with a plate of random food on my lap when I heard the doorbell ring. That was strange. My parents both had keys, and no one else usually visited us around that time of day. I walked to the door and asked, "Who is it?" A man answered, "Hi there, I'm from the electrical company. We're doing a routine check of the electric meters. May I come in and inspect yours? It'll only take a minute." I looked through the peephole and saw a young man, probably around 30, very clean, neatly dressed, hair combed to the side. He was holding a clipboard with some papers attached. I was just about to twist the lock open when I saw something. Because of the fisheye view through the peephole, I could see a little bit to the sides. On my left, on the man's right, I saw light glinting off what looked like a sharp metal object. Then for a second I clearly saw what it was. The cutting edge of an axe. Someone was standing just to the side of the door trying to stay out of view, holding an axe. At that point my memory goes blurry. I remember stepping away from the door and creeping into my room, which was at the far end of the hallway. I closed the door and didn't come out until my parents got home. The bell kept ringing for a few more minutes. Then it finally fell silent. I never told anyone about it. Until now, I guess. These are my stories. Thank you to everyone who has shared their own. I think it's important to learn from these encounters. From the ages of 11 to around 16 or 17, I used to be addicted to playing massively multiplayer online role-playing games or MMORPGs. They were literally my life. I considered my online friends very real, and I loved them, except I lied to them practically the entire time. I was pretending to be a girl, but not for fun. I did it to target single teenage boys online to get in-game currencies, gear, and anything that would help me progress through the game. Anyone who was an avid MMO gamer knows exactly what I'm talking about. Those amazing outfits you have to buy with real money. Those materials you have to buy with real money to progress comfortably and to be able to compete against the best players. I was addicted. I wanted all of it. But I could not get all of it. I could not buy it. My parents would not agree to it, and I did not have a part-time job as a teenager. I devised a plan when I was around 13 or 14 years old. I decided I would pretend to be a teenage girl and get into seemingly realistic online relationships with teenage boys to coax them into sending me these things. I used the names and pictures of teenage girls I found on their personal profiles on sites like Flickr and Photobucket. Usually when a boy got suspicious and tried to snoop because he thought I was lying, he would find those profiles and start believing it was really me. They were already too desperate. I even voice chatted with them. My voice was naturally high-pitched even as a boy going through puberty. It was the perfect formula to trick them into liking me and gifting me. I was desperate for all these in-game items and was not thinking straight. I never realized how much these people could get hurt. In my first MMO, I tricked a boy into sending me an outfit by pretending to be his girlfriend. This boy seemed madly in love with me. Since this was my first time trying this out, I genuinely felt bad for him and wanted to tell him I lied to him. He was pretty similar to me in many ways. He was not well off either. He did not have a job, he had a bad home life. But my idiotic self decided it would be okay for him to gift me. It won't hurt, right? I thought. This huge identity scam I created escalated from there. I tricked many other boys. Teens and possibly even adult men pretending to be teens. It was horrible. I hated myself, but I could not stop. I needed all these gifts in the games. This is where the story really begins. When I was 16, the last guy I ever talked to was a 23-year-old Russian man who we will call Mark. I met Mark on a very popular shooting MMO. We hung out all the time and had many mutual friends on that game. We voice chatted with a group of people multiple times on Skype while playing. I never once decided to scam him because he was a free player, meaning he never spent money on games. He also seemed like a genuinely nice guy. But when he asked me out, I tried to take on what I considered the biggest challenge in this scam. Would I be able to get a free player to spend money on a game for me? Because I was always well-liked online and many people knew who I was, and generally I was a very nice girl. My ego was soaring. I knew I could do it. I accepted to date him online despite him knowing I was a 16-year-old girl and he was a 23-year-old man. In the beginning, he was pretty normal. He was always trying to be sweet and romantic. We played together all the time. He sent all the lovey-dovey kisses and hugs texts. We even had cyber relations. I, being the terrible person I used to be, played along. It was all going well. Too well. However, after a week or two, I noticed something was not right with him. He seemed very obsessive and manipulative. He always talked badly about my other friends from the game to make me unfriend them. He told me they talked crap behind my back. He called them terrible names like skanks and whores. He even sent proof, which I later found out was photoshopped from in-game text chats that disappear, so you cannot ask the friend for proof that they did not say what he claimed. He absolutely despised any guy I ever talked to when we played public matches together. I stupidly went along with it. I did not want him to distrust me so I could get what I wanted. Then the perfect moment came for me to make Mark send me gifts. I had to do it. A new outfit the game introduced was too amazing to pass up. I started by telling him the new game update was pretty cool, and we talked about it for a while. He suggested we both get the new outfit, but I told him I had no money, and I totally would buy it for both of us if I could. He suggested that he would steal money from his mother, a single, hard-working woman taking care of 2 kids. For a second, my mind told me to let it happen. This was when I immediately snapped out of it. I felt horrible. I wanted out. I could not believe what I was doing. Was I really about to tell Mark to go steal money from his mother, who was struggling to pay bills? I couldn't let that happen. I decided to log off immediately and shut my laptop to rethink what I had done all those years. How many of these guys were not in well-off families but were probably using or stealing their parents' money? I could not stop thinking about it all day. The next day, I logged back into Skype at night and was immediately slammed with walls and walls of texts from Mark, asking me where I had gone, why I was not answering, how I was such a terrible person who went to talk to some other guy I knew, and many similar things you hear stereotypical nice guys say to girls that give them a chance, then flake on them for being weird. I was sick to my stomach. I hated myself and I hated Mark. I tried to play it off and said my electricity had cut off the entire day. He did not believe it. I immediately told him I wanted to break up with him. Things took a turn for the worse. He voice called me and I picked up. He was hysterically crying and shouting at me. I tried to remain calm and told him I did not want to play games anymore. I told him I was getting more depressed than I already was, and felt my addiction to games was not helping me, and that I should go out and see the world more, which was all true outside my fake persona. He started shouting at me some more, calling me all kinds of names. This 23-year-old Russian man was threatening what he perceived to be a 16-year-old girl. Everything he said started to get worse. He started talking about how I ruined his life. He told me he would harm himself if I ever left him, which I thought could possibly happen based on what I had heard. I started crying and told him not to. We got into a heated argument. I could hear him throw and break things. I was still crying when I told him I had to go because my parents wanted me to do something. He told me not to leave or he would end himself right then and there. He turned on his camera and threatened to go through with it. I saw the seriousness in his eyes. I was afraid. He could not see me, but I was stuck watching a man threaten to end it all live on camera, all because of me. All because I decided to trick him into buying me gifts. All because of my fake identity and fake relationship. I threw up in the garbage bin in my room. I quickly told him I had to go. I immediately quit Skype and closed my laptop. I cried in my room the entire day, realizing karma had finally caught up with me and this was what I deserved for scamming people. I was a mess. Suddenly, I passed out asleep on my bed. I don't know how or when it happened, but it did. The next day, I was unusually calm. The day went by normally. I sat in front of my laptop but did not open it. I tried to think of a rational solution to all of this. I did not want someone to die because of me. There was no rational solution to any of this. I had to just say goodbye to him and block him forever. Whatever happens, happens. I opened Skype and was immediately slammed by walls of text again. This time I did not read any of it but saw that he had sent some photos. He sent me pictures of himself crying. I was immediately sick again but took a deep breath and went in as calmly as I possibly could. When he came online, I told him I was breaking up with him. Mark again told me he was going to end it all if I ever dared to leave him. I calmly told him if he was going to do that, then why did he not already? He did not answer, clearly shocked by the question. He continued to threaten me again. I told him I didn't care and that he was being too hard on himself. I told him he could find another girlfriend. He still continued to threaten me. I was fed up. I tried to reason with him. I was even on the verge of revealing that I was actually a 16-year-old boy all along, but decided it was not the best idea. I regretfully told him to go end himself so no other woman would have to go through what he did to me. Then I blocked him and deleted him. I deleted my Skype and never logged back on. I did see him online a few times on the game I played. He tried to contact me again, but I ignored him. He deleted me off his friends list in-game, and we never chatted ever again. I stopped pretending to be a girl and told all my friends I was a boy all along, and apologized profusely. The girls felt betrayed because they really trusted me. Most of the boys I led on felt betrayed because they liked me, but none of them made a big deal out of it in the end. I realized how much of an awful person I was for even coming up with this plan, but decided I was not as much of an awful person as a 23-year-old man who threatened to end himself live on camera in front of a 16-year-old girl just for trying to break off an abusive relationship. Screw you, Mark. If you're reading this, let's not meet again. Growing up, I lived with my emotionally and mentally abusive helicopter mother, my misogynistic stepfather, and my brother. When I turned 18, my grandparents were kind enough to let me move in with them since they lived so close to my college. This was my escape from that circus at home, and I was incredibly grateful. I sometimes wonder if my parents had not been so hard on me whether this move would even have happened. But I was an adult and I made these decisions. Luckily, I learned from them. Once I was free and had much more independence, I naturally began to rebel while I was trying to find myself. I rebelled in everything from my clothing and my music to getting tattoos and dating. Specifically, I wanted to date the most out there person I could find, I guess, simply to prove a point. If I could go back to my 18-year-old self, I would punch myself in the face for those decisions. I was on a local MySpace forum when I saw James's username. We had gone to high school together and gotten along well, but I had not seen him in a couple of years. It turned out that James had suffered some childhood trauma and had gone to live with a relative about 8 hours away in another state, where he seemed to be living a more stable life. We started messaging back and forth, and I liked James a lot. He was different, quirky, and edgy. I began speaking with James more and more frequently. Our messages became text messages, and somehow it turned into a relationship that I regret to this day. Every day we texted nonstop, and sometimes the conversation turned dark. James would say things that are forever engraved in my mind. He often talked about his childhood trauma. He discussed self-harm and how he enjoyed watching videos of people hurting themselves. Of course, these were all red flags, and I am still not sure why I continued to stick around. After a couple of months, James came to visit me. We stayed in a hotel for a few days, and it felt like a whirlwind. I truly cared about him, but in retrospect, I do not know if I would call it love or merely having a good time. At the time, though, I was convinced that it was love and that he was the one for me. One evening, I came out of the bathroom and found the hotel room in disarray, with clothes strewn everywhere. James was standing there smiling. He got down on one knee and proposed with a small sapphire and diamond ring. I said yes, but it did not feel real. Something about it felt unsettling, and I remember feeling nauseous. I suppose that lingering embarrassment still affects me. Toward the end of James's visit, we sobbed together and were unsure how we would make this work. What other options did I have besides moving? I withdrew from my classes and relocated to his area. When I told my mother and stepfather, my mom was extremely upset that I had not discussed this with them first. I think that conversation fueled my determination to stick it out and make it work. In my mind, I was an adult making a major decision. I did not need anyone's permission, and I would not let anyone tell me otherwise. We lived in a small bedroom at James's grandmother's house and barely ever left. Whenever I mentioned wanting friends or wanting to get a job so I could leave the house, James acted very strangely. He resisted any idea of me being outside our room or having a separate life. James's quirks grew more pronounced. He became a huge Insane Clown Posse fan during our relationship. I knew he liked them, but not to the extent of a borderline obsession. They were not my cup of tea, but I would never tell someone what they could or could not listen to. Still, things got weird. James's obsession became so extreme that he had a giant tattoo representing his devotion to the group. He listened exclusively to their music and began painting his face with clown makeup every day. He tried to force me to paint my face too. If I refused, he would scream at me, shove me, or even try to trap me in a closet. I never knew what would set him off next. As the days went by, I felt more and more isolated. I stayed in our bedroom almost constantly, only leaving to eat or use the bathroom, and then only if James accompanied me. Otherwise, we just stayed in the room. I had no friends, I did not have permission to get a job, and I had no support system. One day, I invaded James's privacy. He kept a notebook that he used as a journal, and he left it on the bed while getting ready for work. Some of his entries were mild, but others described how he wanted to hurt me in some truly sadistic ways. And he even toyed with the idea that I should not be alive. Reading those words saved my life. At that time, I had begun speaking again with my parents, and my aunt lived a couple of hours away. I called everyone to say I was coming home and told them what I had just read. My aunt packed her things and started driving immediately just to make sure I could leave safely. I told James I had seen his writing and that this relationship was over. He fell to his knees begging me not to leave and saying that he loved me. Then his tears turned to anger, and he tried to lock me in the closet so that I could not escape. Fortunately, he had to go to work before he could do any real harm. While he was gone, I packed my things to the sound of his grandmother screaming at me, and I left. Unfortunately, the story does not end there. A few months later, James and I became friends again. I visited him one more time. Nothing bad happened, but I just knew I had to cut him out of my life. Years passed, 3 to 4 years I would say, and I heard through mutual friends that James had gotten married. I had moved across the country for school and to explore a new area, finally experiencing the independence I had missed the first time around. James occasionally tried to speak with me on social media. I barely replied, if at all. I am now 32 years old and recently got married. My husband and I are trying for our first baby, which is very exciting. James had not been on my mind in years, until recently. He found me on Facebook and messaged me. I told him we were not friends and that his messages were inappropriate. I said, "Can you please stop?" He replied, "Nah," Fair enough, I blocked him. A few months later, I received a Snapchat request from him. I blocked that too. A few months after that, he followed me on Instagram. My Instagram was public because I share my travel and fitness journey. When I went to block him there, I saw it was a brand new account with no followers except me. I immediately made my profile private, blocked the new account, and then used services like Been Verified to remove my information from public databases. I feel that as a teenager I made a grave mistake, and that I have since moved on and built a normal, happy life. I do not understand why he continues to lurk and try to antagonize me. So James, I have you blocked these days. I hope that is a clear message. I do not want to meet you again. I was in my 20s at the time, young and full of ambition. Back then, I was a raging alcoholic and drug addict, so my memory is kind of hazy. I do apologize if most details aren't there or if major events are left out. I'm now sober almost a year. Anyway, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah from Arizona, and I had gotten a job as a service technician. One of the jobs I went on was adding devices for equipment at a string of gas stations, starting from St. George to Salt Lake City. I was slowly working my way up the state, hitting every store that needed devices. I cannot remember exactly where I was for the life of me. Somewhere between Richfield and another small town. I had finished a store late, around 10 or 11 p.m., and wanted to get to the next town over so I could continue my work in the morning, rather than drive 2 hours in the morning. As I was driving down the highway, Google Maps told me to take this dirt road to get to the town I was working in next. Hesitant about why this was the route, I turned left onto it. It was a long dirt road with nothing around me. Pitch black darkness other than my high beams. About 5 to 7 minutes into my drive, my truck sputtered. It was an old 2008 work truck, a piece of junk. I cursed under my breath and put it in park. I lifted the hood, but nothing seemed to be wrong. I have mild mechanical knowledge. Of course, I looked down at my phone and saw I had no cell service at all. I checked my work phone. Same thing. My only options were pretty much to either wait it out until daytime or find a spot where I could get a bar of service. So I took option 2. Also, I usually carry firearms, but on this trip I had forgotten to bring one with me. Wielding a 10-inch pipe wrench and a Milwaukee flashlight, I walked into the desert determined to be rescued from the dark abyss. I'd like to add that this road was barely paved. I mean, you would not even take a truck on this unless you had to or it led to a specific point. I wouldn't even call it a road. More of a trail. Brush and trees lined the trail like a natural wall. I'm not an anxious person or one who gets scared very easily. I grew up in Arizona, so I was pretty used to the dark, quiet desert. But every step further from the truck made me feel more tense. I walked for about 10 minutes until I heard laughing, kind of muffled laughing, something you'd hear out of a kid's show. Right behind me. I swung around quickly. Nothing. My boots were sinking into the mounds of sand as I quickly kept pushing forward. My heart was beating out of my chest like a ticking time bomb. I heard it again, but closer, louder, like it was 4 or 5 feet from me. I was fully sprinting into the desert brush and sand now. My eyes darted like lasers around for somewhere to hide. I do not believe in paranormal things or aliens or anything like that. I just figured it was some deranged desert hobo or something, or some sort of drug addict. The adrenaline was coursing through me. I hid behind a rock that was nearby. I crouched down, my right knee was hurting from all the rocks on the ground, but I didn't care. I needed to hide. The rock was one of those 3-foot-high mound rocks. The moon was shining bright so I could see some things. As I scanned the desert, I saw the silhouettes of two people running. I could barely make them out, but my eyes had adjusted to the dark abyss. I forgot to mention that after a while of this running, I turned my flashlight off so as not to give away my location. I heard them talking, but I was far enough away that I couldn't understand what they were saying. I literally sent out a message to my family and friends, saying that I loved them and that I was sorry for anything I had done wrong in life. They didn't send because I did not have any service. I was just coping in a traumatic event. I'm not a small guy. I'm 5 feet 10 inches tall and weigh 230 pounds. But I was unarmed and outnumbered. And God knows how many others were out there with them and what they were planning to do when I was found and helpless. I waited, but they did not leave the general location where they were. They were scrambling around like mosquitoes. I thought of the only thing I could do. I grabbed 2 smallish rocks. I'm not religious, but I prayed to God that night and threw them far in a direction away from the truck and the road. I heard them scurry away toward the noise, shouting at each other as they trucked through the desert. I slowly crouch-walked through the brush back to the truck. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I heard another set of stomping after the 2 had run. There were confirmed to be 3 people in the desert with me. As I got closer, I could see the truck. I felt like I was in heaven. Every step was closer to salvation. My boots filled with sand with every stomp into the soft, cold sand. Branches and brush stabbed me into my cargo work pants. I heard them tailing me. For the love of God, I could not turn around. I did not even care to see who or what was chasing me. I saw the truck. The driver's side door was completely open. I had left it closed. I checked the back seat and flung the door open more. I flew into the driver's seat in the truck and did the most stupid thing ever. But the only thing I could think of, I started it. It took a couple tries to start, but it cranked and let out a roar. I threw the gear shifter in drive and drove. As I was driving, hauling ass down this dirt road, I saw hooded people hiding along the sides of the road, ducking as I drove by, scattering into the darkness like roaches in a kitchen. I rolled down the window and chucked my pipe wrench as hard as I could right at one of them and sped off. I watched it do flips right into where they were. I yelled as I sped off into the pitch-dark desert night. Trails of dust followed the truck as I drove. Silence. Nothing but me and my heavy breathing trying to make sense of the whole situation. I drove until I saw town lights. I was sweating white knuckles on the steering wheel, gritting my teeth, going at least 75 miles per hour. I got into the small town at around midnight. I threw myself into a local 7-Eleven. Looking terrified, the cashier asked me what was wrong, and I just asked her to call the sheriff's office. The sheriff was some old, burly-looking man. I'm covered in tattoos head to toe, so he treated me as a criminal almost. Turns out some hose had burst. I do not remember exactly what it was. I got into town and called my boss, who was upset at the late-night call he was receiving. He was shocked at what I said and told me to call the sheriff's office and mechanic. The mechanic guy was super nice and didn't charge me for the repair. The cops weren't much help. They basically looked at me like I had been up too long and was hallucinating. I was not. Asked if I had taken drugs or had been drinking, and barely wrote anything on the report. The mechanic was telling me that he had never heard of something like that in the area. I stayed in a motel that night. I believe it was a Motel 6, but I cannot remember. I swear I didn't get a lick of sleep that night after I showered the dirt off of me. I ended up returning home early and quit this job later down the line for other reasons. I have since moved out of Utah to Florida. A photo I had taken on the service call came up and reminded me of this story. I had to write about it. I had to tell someone. Was this a robbery? Were they trying to hurt me? Did they see the work truck and say, "Ooh, expensive tools and copper"? I have no idea. I'm just curious, who do you think these people were and why were they hunting me like an animal? Has anyone had a similar experience? How close do you think I was to being murdered in the desert? Edit. The truck was looted. I remember all the wire, pipe, and some power tools were taken. We humans are not afraid of being alone in the dark, but finding someone else in the dark with us. I should preface this by saying that this is an extremely complicated and personal situation and experience. I will try my best to keep it brief. Names and any identifying details will not be used here. I have always struggled with mental health issues from a young age. By the time I was 15 years old, things had become unmanageable for my parents. After my freshman year in high school, they decided to send me to a lockdown school. One morning, I literally woke up to two strangers in my home who threatened me and told me I was going to a boarding school. They said if I refused, they would put handcuffs on me. To make the story short, I went. After a wilderness program, I was enrolled into a residential treatment center, or RTC. The school I went to was affiliated with some very abusive lockdown schools in the United States, many of which have been thankfully shut down because of abuse. The school was extremely abusive. Isolation, forced medication, physical restraint, stress positions, attack therapy, withholding exercise and food. These were all common there. The full details do not pertain to what I want to express here. What needs to be said is that this school took me, an already somewhat mentally ill child, and made everything a million times worse. If I had been a troubled boy before, I was much worse after just a few days. I became a shell of a person and was dissociated most of the time, because I knew no other way to cope. A couple of weeks or so after I arrived, a boy named James came onto our unit, which was what they called our group of kids living in a dorm. This is where the experience I want to share really begins. I hated James at first. He rubbed me the wrong way, and I went out of my way to be mean to him. However, we ended up in the same room together and things began to change. I began to become fond of him. We started spending a lot of alone time together, bonding. I did not know it at the time, but I slowly began to fall in love with him. I identified as heterosexual, so for me it was more of a brotherly kind of love. Even though looking back there were hidden signs of a possible romantic relationship between us. Things at the school became worse and worse, and James and I sheltered each other from the storm of abuse. We were all that we had. We suffered horrible experiences together, and through that bond of trauma, something was created between us. I absolutely needed James to survive. It was like he was a part of me. Without him, I felt empty. He felt the same way, and we promised each other that we would never be apart and would continue our relationship as soon as we left the school. Luckily, James and his family lived only an hour away from my parents' home. The day came when he was discharged from the school. I was supposed to stay, but after begging and pleading with my parents, I was allowed to be discharged too. Overjoyed, I called James and told him the good news. He and I began seeing each other 2 or 3 times a week, and it was truly one of the happiest times of my life. He was my world, the only one who knew the terror of what I had been through. After a while, however, his parents noticed James was overly physically affectionate with me and noticed how emotionally attached I was. I will never truly know why what happened next happened. I can only guess. One day, I received an email from James. It said he thought we should spend less time together and included a cruel message at the bottom. James and I used to tell each other we loved one another. He would say that he loved me with 99% of his soul, as it couldn't be 100% because he didn't love himself. At the bottom of this email he said, "By the way, it's 72% now." I completely lost it, screaming, crying, begging, how could this be? I could not accept this. No one would ever understand me except for him, and I couldn't breathe without him. We saw each other a couple more times after that, but it was all different. He was different. After the last time I saw him, he told me he wanted to stop all contact completely. It started with phone calls. I knew his house phone number and his cell phone. I would call all day, sometimes not saying anything, other times begging in tears for him to see me, to love me again. I begged his parents and pleaded with them. Then it escalated. I began calling his mother's cell phone, her work phone. I got his father's cell phone and work phone, and would call those too. Sometimes I begged, other times I said nothing at all. I also manipulated a mutual friend to call these numbers with me on the line, asking specific questions. Eventually, they had to change all the numbers in the house. Before James asked for no contact, we attended a church group together. I still knew where it was, and I knew he still went. I was dating a much older girl at the time, and I had her drive me to the group so I could try to see him. The first couple of times he did not show, but I asked everyone there for information on him. The third time I showed up, he was there. I approached him and asked if he really did not love me anymore. He looked me in the eyes and said no, he did not. I broke down in tears, begged him, caused a scene, and was asked to leave. It must have been humiliating for him. He also identified as heterosexual. I then had my girlfriend drive by his house in the middle of the night with me. I would stare up at his window. This happened at least twice. I just sat and stared. I also had her knock on their door a couple of times asking if James was home. Time passed and somehow I convinced James to add me as a MySpace friend. This gave me hope that our relationship could be rekindled, though deep down I knew better. I realized he had a girlfriend and messaged her. I manipulated her to meet me in person, telling her not to tell him. We met soon after and I seduced her. I had her call him and ask if he wanted to be friends again. He said no and that he pitied me. Again, I lost it. I continued to seduce his girlfriend and got all kinds of private information from her. New phone numbers, their sexual activities, and family details. I hacked into his MySpace and shut it down. I then flooded the house phone and his cell phone with calls. I screamed at his mother and gloated to him about how I had used his girlfriend. They had to change all their numbers again. After one final phone call with James and his girlfriend, a switch flipped in my head. I was done. I had to stop. It was over. I feel terrible for terrorizing this family. I wish I could apologize. I share this experience to let others understand the other side of stalking. I was very sick. There is no excuse for my behavior, and I am lucky I was never arrested. There is much more to this story, but I hope it helps someone understand why some people behave this way. Today, I am a very different person. I still struggle with borderline personality disorder, but I have never acted out like that since then. I am fortunate to have a stable life now, and it took me years to get here. I hope this helps others understand stalking behaviors better. I've been on Grindr for about 10 years. 5 of those years were technically illegal, definitely not proud of that, and I've had plenty of messed up experiences. but one in particular stands out. I was 19 in college at a party without my car. My phone was down to about 10%, and a pretty attractive guy on Grindr offered to pick me up. He said we could hang out at his place before he drove me home. So of course I jumped on the chance. When we got to his place, he got me pretty drunk. Not unusual for me, but he didn't try to make a move or anything. I figured he was just waiting and would convince me to stay the night later. After a couple of hours, my phone finally died. That last 1% always lasts way longer than it should. And before I even said anything, he noticed. Then he stood up and said, "Well, let's go to the car then." I asked if he had a charger I could use, and he just said, "No." Once we were in the car, he got quiet and less flirty. I kind of spaced out, enjoying the music and looking out the window. I didn't even realize he hadn't asked where I lived until we'd been driving for over an hour. Not towards my town, but deeper into the canyons around the Salt Lake City area. When I asked where he was going, he just said, "Thought we could go for a drive." And my drunk self was like, "Oh, okay." To make a long story short, he ended up driving us 4 or 5 miles down a dirt road with no signs or houses until we reached a cabin. No lights on, no cars outside. He parked and turned off the car. That's when the dread started creeping in as I sobered up. I told him I'd had too much to drink and probably should go home, but he just sat there staring at the cabin. Then he asked, "You said you like being kinky, you're pretty submissive, right?" I said, Sure, but I just meant normal rough kind of stuff. Nothing wild." He got annoyed and his tone got harsher, like he was just spitting out the bare minimum. He said something about how some of his favorite people are those who find pleasure in pain. And if someone goes into shock enough times, it's like a drug. They crave more. Then he said something about pushing someone into the deep end being the fastest way to teach them to swim. By then I was scared enough to assert myself and said firmly, "Okay, well, that sounds fun, but just not tonight. I just want to go home now, this place is creepy." He sighed and gripped his keys tighter. Just as I glanced at his phone sitting in the cup holder, right before I thought about grabbing it, he snatched it up so fast and held it behind his head with his left hand, making it clear I wasn't getting near it. I made a confused sound, and he gave me this half smile, like a dad proud of his kid for standing up for themselves. It got quiet and he looked me up and down for a minute. Then, gruffly, he said, "Let's go inside. I have friends you'll really like once you meet them. You'll feel a lot better." But he wasn't even trying to sound genuine or comforting like earlier. I lied and said, "I told my roommates and a friend I was meeting up with you before you picked me up. I sent them screenshots of your face and some of our conversation. They'll freak out if I don't charge my phone and reply to them soon." I tried to make it sound like I was worried about my friends, not accusing him, but he clearly knew what I was implying. He let out an exasperated, grunty sigh, started the car and drove away, keeping the headlights off the whole way back down the dirt road for some reason. On the drive back, I got nervous he might stalk me or come after me later. I tried to apologize and say I might be down to hang out another time, but just not that night. He didn't say a word, never asked where I lived, and dropped me off at a McDonald's about 40 miles from my apartment. As I was stepping out, he suddenly leaned over and shoved me hard, so I almost fell out the rest of the way. Then he grabbed my backpack from the floor, threw it out the window across the parking lot, and peeled off with the passenger door still open. My laptop was broken, and my phone cracked. I had to ask a stranger to use her charger to call an Uber. At that point, I just wanted to get home. What's weird is that while it was happening, though I was terrified, I wasn't really thinking about exactly what he planned to do. I just knew I needed to get away. It wasn't until I got home and took a shower that the full weight of what happened hit me. I almost had a panic attack, so I sat in the shower with my head between my knees and cried until the water ran cold. Then I woke my roommate up and told him what happened. He calmed me down. So yeah, I still have a Grindr account, but mostly just for ego boosts. I'm really reluctant to meet anyone from it now. Anyway, to all the girls and gays out there, please be careful. Trust your gut. Being a housekeeper, I have seen some things. I have seen a room where someone snuck in their dog, kitten, and chicken. Pets are not allowed. I once had a room that I was cleaning as a stayover that had tripods set up around the bed, professional camera equipment cases, an adult-sized pacifier on site, and extra-large-sized children's diapers. The two people in that room were in their early 20s. I even had a room once that we had to call the cops on for a raid because we found meth. They found a lot of drugs and guns in that room. But today is the first time I have ever actually felt scared to be in a guest room. As I was working on a room that had already been vacated, a man in the next room over caught me at my supply cart. He was scheduled to stay for several days, and he told me, "You can go ahead and clean my room now. I'm going down for breakfast." Excellent. I love getting my stayovers done early. It makes things easier for the people working laundry the sooner we get the dirty laundry down to them. So I popped over into his room, opening it up and propping the door open with a stopper like we always do. The first thing I noticed was that he had around 20 prescription bottles lined up on one of the two beds, along with insulin and needles. I'm nosy, I'll admit it, and I wanted to see what medications he was on. Oddly, it was only 2 different types of medication for all 20 bottles. About 2/3 were diabetes medication, and the rest were cholesterol medication. That was a little weird having so many bottles of the same meds, but whatever. I went to make the bed and saw that some of the bedding was stained, and I sighed, knowing now I would have to change all the bedding instead of just turning down the sheets and blanket. So I left the room, closing it behind me to go get the linens I needed, then headed right back to the room. I propped the door open again and headed to set the clean linens on the desk chair when I saw out of the corner of my eye 2 notes sitting on the TV armoire. It wouldn't mean anything except I caught the word kill scrawled on one of them. I dropped the linens and took a closer look. What I read on the first note made my blood run cold. You don't have to forgive her, you just can't kill her. You are here to take money and alcohol away from you. Get over having to kill her and you can safely leave. My heart was pounding. My eyes went to the second note, which at first glance looked like a to-do list, but in the end made my stomach churn. Spray and wash, apply for Medicare, insubordination, the soul is healed by being with children, bank card follow-up, inheritance, savings, Kauai Pop 10,500, Map, Montana. There will be a day of reckoning. Did you tell Mom what I said? How did Bev get my address? It was too much. I quickly snapped pictures of them on my phone so I could show my boss why I would not clean his room. I left the room quickly, closing it up behind me. As the door closed, I turned and saw the man just 10 feet away from me coming back to his room. My heart was in my throat, but I managed to smile and told him, "I need more supplies, I'll be back to your room in a bit." I took off straight for the elevator, having noticed our maintenance man waiting for the slow transport. In a hushed tone, I told him what I found, and he saw I was shaken. Not a normal state for me. He rode down with me and I went straight to my boss and told her that for the first time in all these years, I was not comfortable being in a guest's room. I showed her the pictures and her face was still and pale. She went to the front desk and asked our general manager for a minute of her time and brought her into the office to show her. She agreed this was not a safe situation and took our maintenance man with her to inform the man that he had 1 hour to get his belongings and leave the hotel, and he was not welcome back. I spent a few minutes in the laundry room trying to calm down. Then my boss went back up with me to the floor until the man was officially out of the hotel. I don't know who Bev is. I don't know who the woman is that he didn't feel he needed to forgive. But man in room 422, let's never meet again.